Hey, what's up, investors? My name is Devin Moreno. I'm a property manager and investor in the Baltimore City, DC area. I actually specialize in managing rooming houses. And oftentimes in these rooming houses, I deal with a lot of different personalities that have to interact with each other, but also even in other properties that I manage, like the single family homes and such, you're going to notice that dealing with tenants requires you to understand human psychology and how people actually work. A lot of new investors get into this business and they go in with this expectation of how humans should operate. And that's kind of ridiculous. Anyone in politics or any type of customer service and such, and honestly, you just even knowing your own family and friends groups, you can probably identify people where you might say these lines like, well, we're all adults here, let's go ahead and act like adults. But of course, that concept in of itself is ridiculous to even to expect. Most people you can name in your life generally have sort of act certain ways that are either self-detrimental or detrimental to other people, and they find ways to rationalize, justify this. And now we are going to take those people and put them in your home. And so you're going to have to deal with them for the next 12 months, and you almost have this like marriage to them. And if you're not prepared on how to deal with that, then you're often going to find that you're going to make your rental process worse. Like everything's going to be much harder. And this doesn't just necessarily stop with tenants. It can go into contractors and such, but this video will focus a little bit more on tenants just because of that relationship that you're going to be having with them throughout the months. So I'm going to talk about just 3 things that you need to understand about human psychology. Of course, there's many more, but this is not a psychology video, but at least the main 3 that I found that I've had to recognize in order to work around people and make sure that I get the best results from my tenant. So oftentimes these 3 things can be broken up best into self-justifications, there are victim mentalities, and also your response, what you respond to, the sort of stimuli, I would call it, but to threats or to positive response. So let's go into number 1, the self-justification. Most people, regardless of what they do, are remarkably good at justifying everything that they do. All of any bad stuff that they do will often get really easily justified. And keep in mind, you can name this throughout your own life. It's essentially people who do really heinous stuff or whatnot. They'll say, well, it's because of this or that or this or that. You see it all the time in your own family and friends. Even Hitler probably didn't find anything wrong with massacring waves of people. Okay, so this is a very normal human phenomenon. Okay, it's actually kind of almost offensive to the human mentality. So pretty normal to happen. You just have to understand that. All right. So a lot of times when dealing with tenants, we oftentimes don't want to necessarily blame them for what happened, even if it is their fault, okay? We oftentimes don't want to blame them because they'll get defensive very fast. They'll shut down and close off to you. So that's something just to note. That is a normal part of psychology. If you are in the customer service business, you know this very well. The customer is always right sort of thing. Of course, anyone in customer service knows that the customer is usually the problem, but you can't say that. You say the customer is always right, and you work around their psychology in order to fit them because they're the ones making the business thrive. Well, it's the same with your tenant. Your tenant is paying you rent. You do not want this contentious relationship with your tenant just because they keep doing things wrong. You have to find creative ways to make them align with you. And if you're just going to battle it out through arguments and expect that through arguments you're going to get your way across, you're actually throwing up many walls for them to stop listening to you. The next thing is the victim mentality. Now, this one is often going to happen in regards to finances. Oftentimes, if anything's going wrong, or especially with finances, actually, let's just go into that. People are remarkably bad at managing finances. We don't teach it in high school, college, or anywhere, so you have to learn it from your parents, and most parents are bad at it too. So essentially, a lot of things will go wrong, maybe even the way that they break things in the house and whatnot. This kind of almost bleeds into self-justification, but they will often say, well, it's not my fault. It's not because of me. It's not what I'm doing. But yet, if you were to look at the lens of their life, you can see exactly what they're doing, where yes, it is most of the time their fault. And you're going to have to learn how to work around that, how to educate people, and how to talk to them. Now, obviously not as bluntly as I'm probably talking on this camera, but basically, just kind of work around them to kind of like help them and make sure they understand, you know what, I agree with you, it's not your fault. Let's go ahead and set up something where we can, maybe creative ways to help them with their finances. That is not usually lowering rent. Normally that doesn't help at all. You could lower the rent to zero and they still will have money problems. But it's like, creative ways to assist them with money management. Maybe, like for example, one that I've seen is you putting them in a payment plan. So maybe they pay on the 1st and the 15th instead, and it breaks up the payments for them, or maybe weekly payments, or, that sort of thing, being a little bit creative and assisting them with that process. Because if you simply just get mad at them for things that they're breaking, also things that they're breaking, for example, that's another one. They'll often blame whatever else it is. It's never their fault, ever, for anything. You generally want to enter the house and almost teach them how these things work. Teach them like how the furnace works, how to change the filter, the mini splitter, whatever you got in the home, how these things work. Dishwashers, tell them, yes, you cannot throw a turkey down the dishwasher. Your garbage disposal will not take pounds of spaghetti. Like, these things might seem obvious to you, but you're gonna have to teach them that and actually talk to them about it, because when that actually does happen, they will never accuse themselves of it, and they're going to get mad at you for not fixing it sooner. So just something to consider about human psychology. The next is response to threats or positive reinforcement, positive, negative reinforcement. It's sort of like how you raise your child, realistically. When you have a child, you can either choose to spank the child or instead reinforce with candy. These are two methods that we use to motivate people in a certain direction. Most people, and a lot of your tenants, are not going to do what you need them to do or take care of the house or whatnot without that positive or negative reinforcement. And this especially is true when it comes to paying the rent. If the person is not paying the rent, oftentimes if there's no threat, and that's one thing actually, when I was talking to one of my friends, he has a tenant who stopped paying him rent. If the tenant has no threat of you kicking them out, then they have really no incentive to pay the rent. They're not going to just pay the rent because it's the right thing to do. Remember the self-justification, rationalizations, and all of that. There's a reason their Verizon bill is getting paid and not your rent payment. And the reason is because when you stop paying a Verizon bill, suddenly you lose your phone. It gets cut off immediately. But what happens when you stop paying the rent? Nothing. Nothing happens. And so they recognize that. And so, you stop paying your car payment, car gets repossessed. Everything else has a consequence for it, but paying the rent, the consequences are sort of delayed. So whenever you find yourself in a money management situation, which as I mentioned, most all people have, then the rent is one of the first things that fall. And so you're going to have to learn how to actualize those threats to push them in one direction and positive reinforcement in the other direction. And so oftentimes you'll see that. So this pincer maneuver to get them to do what you need them to do, let's say in cash for keys. For example, for those who don't know what cash for keys is when you are paying the tenant to leave your house. Let's say that's the route you have to go, and it's just much cheaper to do it that way than go through the eviction process. Well, that in and of itself, one of my partners tried it, that in and of itself doesn't really do a lot. Usually it's cash for keys in also combination with an eviction process looming toward them. And then that pushes them out. And so that's if you want to go that kind of route. But if you want to keep them in the home, there's going to be a lot of ways where maybe you're talking to the tenant and you say, hey, look, if you pay your rent for the next 3 months, whatever, on time, then we'll lower your rent by $25 if you do that. But if you don't, then your rent will go up. At the end of this lease term, guaranteed or whatnot. Maybe you're trying to coach them that way. And you would have that, the negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. Same thing you would do with a child. These are things that might sound offensive on the surface because I'm talking about adults as if they're children, but this is not just a tenant thing. This is a customer service thing. Anyone in customer service, all of you know how annoying your customers are to work with, right? Why can I say these blanket statements? All of your friends and family, you know that some of your friends and family, many of your friends and family have little things that they do that are just kind of why are you doing this? And that's stupid and whatnot. That's because everybody does it. Even you probably watching this video have some of these things. Even myself have some of these things innately because once again, this is human psychology. This is normal in human behavior. You're going to have to learn how to work around that. So just keep that in mind that yes, you will have to handhold your tenant, and no, we are not all adults here. And unfortunately, that's the reality of doing this. And of course, though, if you don't want to deal with this, then you can go ahead and just ask me to manage the property and I'll do it for you. I have no problem with that. So anyway, if you have any questions about this, these are some important lessons learned, and many others, of course, with human, rational, and psychology. But if you have any questions, let me know. Comment below, and I will talk to you all very soon.